verse 36. When Jesus tells the disciples that he's leaving and the disciples cannot go with him, the disciples are disturbed, particularly Simon Peter. And it says in verse 36, Simon Peter said unto him, Lord, whither goest thou? In other words, where are you going? Jesus answered him, Whither I go, thou canst not follow me now. In other words, where I'm going, you can't go with me now. But now notice the last part of the verse. But thou shalt follow me afterwards. Did Jesus promise Peter and the disciples that they would go where Jesus was going, according to this verse? Absolutely. He said, you cannot follow me now. I'm going to my Father. I'm going to heaven. You can't follow me now, but you will follow me later. In other words, did he promise to take them to heaven? Yes, he did. That's a very, very important point. Keep that in the back of your mind. Now the question is, why did Jesus go back to heaven? Why have 2,000 years plus passed since Jesus went to heaven? Actually, not 2,000 plus, but about approximately 2,000 years. Why did Jesus go back to heaven? What has he been doing? Notice John chapter 14, and let's read verses 1 and 2. John 14, verses 1 and 2. Jesus knew that the disciples were deeply troubled when he said that he was leaving and they could not go with him then. They knew that he had said that they could follow him later, but they didn't want to go later. They wanted to go right away. And so Jesus says in John 14, verse 1, Let not your heart be troubled. Ye believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house, where is the Father's house? In heaven. Jesus taught us to pray, Our Father which art in heaven. The Father's house is in heaven. So Jesus says, in my Father's house are what? Many mansions. Now, do you know some people think that Jesus went to heaven to do some heavenly contracting? In other words, he went to heaven to build us mansions. That is not what the text says. When Jesus speaks, he says, in my Father's house are many mansions. In other words, they were already there when he said it. Jesus did not go to heaven to build houses for us. After all, he who spoke the world into existence in 6 days and rested the seventh has not needed 2,000 years to build heavenly houses for his people. So this work of preparation must be referring to something else. Let's finish reading the verse. Let not your heart be troubled. Ye believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to what? I go to prepare a place for you. Why did Jesus go back to heaven? He went to heaven to prepare a place for his people. Let me ask you then, when Jesus died on the cross, was his work finished? Was it? If his work was finished, why didn't he just take everybody to heaven then? Why have 2,000 years have gone by? Did Jesus have a work of preparation to perform in heaven for his people? Yes. He says, I am going to prepare a place for you. Now, there's a point that I want us to underline as we go to our next point in our study, and it's this. The Gospel of John and the book of Revelation were written by the same person. Did you know that? And they were written approximately around the same time. So do you think that perhaps there is some relationship between the Gospel of John and the book of Revelation? Actually, we're going to find this evening that Revelation and John are very closely linked. They are very closely intertwined. Now, what does John mean when he quotes Jesus as saying, I go to prepare a place for you? How does Jesus prepare a place for his people? I believe that the answer is found primarily in 2 books of the New Testament. The first book is, of course, the book of Hebrews. If you look at the book of Hebrews, it describes the work of Christ as our high priest in heaven from beginning to end. It explains what Jesus is doing in heaven to prepare a place for his people to go there. But the book of Revelation also explains how Jesus is preparing a place for his people. In other words, both Revelation and Hebrews explain the work that Jesus is performing in heaven now in order to prepare a place for his people to go there. Now, I would like to go, first of all, I'm not going to go into Hebrews tonight because we're talking about the Gospel of John and we're talking about the book of Revelation and the Hebrew sanctuary. What I would like to do is go to the book of Revelation first and discuss a little bit what Jesus does to prepare a place for his people. As I mentioned in our first study together, the book of Revelation is organized in a very interesting way. You have 7 churches, then you have 7 seals, and you have 7 trumpets. Now, the 7 churches are within the context of the 7-branched candlestick of the sanctuary, because Jesus is walking among the 7 candlesticks. The 7 seals are in the context of the table of the showbread. That is, in the sanctuary, in the holy place, there was a table that had 12 loaves of bread, 2 stacks of 6. And the seals are presented within the context of the table of the showbread, as the churches are placed within the context of the 7 candlesticks, or the 7-branched candlestick. When you get to the trumpets, we're going to notice this in a minute. When you get to the trumpets, Jesus is at the altar of incense. He's at the golden altar. In other words, the churches, the seals, and the trumpets move us to the 3 pieces of furniture in the holy place. During the church